Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. What a great crowd. This is wonderful. On behalf of the Genealogical Society of Bergen County, I would like to welcome you all here tonight. From what I'm hearing, we have a wonderful program ahead of us. And I'm looking forward to it, I know that, and I'm sure you all, well, obviously you all are too. And Reverend Rob Miller will be giving the presentation. Thank you so much for doing this for us. And I would just like to tell you folks, if you have interest in your family history, in your town history, come join us. We meet every fourth Monday of the month at the Ridgewood Public Library at 7 p.m. So every fourth Monday, and we have speakers at every meeting except during the summer, but this is an exception. This is our first field trip, which we love. So I welcome you all, and I hope you will take advantage and come out Monday, 7 p.m., fourth Monday of the month, 7 p.m., Ridgewood Library. So I hope to see some of you there. I am going to introduce our live, this is our, the director of the Ridgewood Library's Local History Department, Sarah Kiefer, and she's going to talk about some of the upcoming programs.
I got a promotion for a second there. Yes, I'm the head of the Local History and Genealogy Department. For those of you who haven't stopped by the library in a while, we are fully open. The Heritage Center is open the same hours as the library. I'm just not always there, so just feel free to ask the reference librarian to unlock the room for you. And we have all the Genealogy Society's resources there, you know, the family history files, the church and cemetery records, and access to some of the databases. So please feel free to stop by. But I did want to make a point to announce, because anybody that's a member of the society, you'll be getting an email next week. Our 20th annual genealogy lock-in will be held on Saturday, October 14th from 5 to 10 p.m. at the library. So the lock-in being you get locked in the library and you get to have a full night of genealogy stuff. So we'll have an Ask Experts panel, various workshops on topics like German genealogy to the DNA roundtable. I'm going to give a tour of the archive because the library is celebrating its 100th year of library services. So lots of different things you can experience through the night and just have a fun night talking to other genealogists about any of the questions you have. So again, that's Saturday, October 14th. If you're a member of the society, you'll get the email next week. After that, it's open to the public, so anybody that's not a member should definitely come. We have beginner genealogy as well. And then throughout the fall, you'll also see announcements for our celebrating of our 100th. So there'll be a program on November 3rd, it's a Friday, and then further in the future, December 9th, we'll be doing a family morning event, story time, happy birthday to the Peace Memorial Library, and then a lecture in the afternoon on the history of the library. So that's everything. If you have questions, you can find me at the library, and hope you can all come to the lock-in. It's a good event. Yes?
Can I make a plug for you, Sarah?
Sure.
Sarah, at her position, has a wonderful thing that she does, and that is, I think it's only in Ridgewood, but maybe it's beyond that.
The house histories?
Pardon?
House histories?
The house history.
Yeah, we do house histories, and there will be a workshop on how to do house histories at the lock-in. But thank you, Chuck, so much. Yes, we offer on-site appointments if you want to learn a little bit about the history of your home. And then we also offer that as a service with a small fee if you want us to do the research for you. So thank you for that.
It is wonderful. I got it as a Valentine present.
Our resources are primarily Ridgewood. We can point you in the right direction for other areas as well, but like our older maps and everything are Ridgewood based. But the workshop at the lock-in will be on how to do them in general. And then, we can always help you get to the next steps. So, okay, back to you, Lauren. Or,
I'll take it. And, thank you, Kevin. I was just going to ask Kevin to do me a favor, close that door, or we get to hear 17 the whole time. Arlene is our church historian. She's also presenting with me. She's quality control in a lot of ways to make sure if I make a mistake. And so with different information out there, I should have scheduled the tour of the graveyard at 6:30. By the time we're done here, it'd be too dark. If you ever want to tour the graveyard, we're a historic site, so you can come anytime, right? And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. I'm going to just we're 298 years old, so we'd be here a long time if I covered everything. And some of the things I find interesting, Arlene doesn't really find interesting, and vice versa, and that's the same for you. So we're going to cover some tastes. And so our theme was the seasons of change. And Ecclesiastes from the Old Testament, there's nothing new under the sun, and then there's also a season for everything. So we're going to see, as we look at our history, certain things repeat themselves, certain things that the church has to deal with, and while we think we have new problems, they've been there a long time. So I always get two questions, so that's how we're going to start with the two questions I get the most. So why Paramus and not Ridgewood if we are in the village of Ridgewood? And so really Ridgewood was not so named until 1866, so we're just so old that we predate them. And so this area, which included Ridgewood, was a vaguely defined area called Paramus. And the village of Ridgewood wasn't established as a village until 1894. And then Paramus, the borough that we know now, wasn't formalized or didn't even come until March 2nd, 1922. So that's almost 200 years after we were founded. So that's why we're Old Paramus here in the village of Ridgewood. And you can see the name has changed. It really comes from an Indian word, and I could try to pronounce it for you, but I probably wouldn't get it right. And then it has evolved. And I put in there, you can maybe see it or not, but our formal name as a church is the Consistory of the Congregation of Paramus, Inc., which is a practical name if I've ever heard one. I'm a member of the Consistory of the Congregation of Paramus, Inc., and informal name was Paramus Reformed Protestant Dutch Church to Paramus Reformed Church, and now Old Paramus Reformed Church in the 60s, because they thought that would clarify things. I don't know if that was the moment everyone started to think we were a museum only, and that's another question I get. And so I'm going to cover a few facts that you may or may want to know, but it gives you a little detail on who we are. And that's the next question I'm always asked. What are you reformed from? Are you like a reformed school? Were you naughty? Did you do something wrong? And so I'm going to give you a little bit on that. We're part of the Protestant Reformation of 1517, which was started by Martin Luther. But our preeminent theologian is John Calvin, so we're often called Calvinists. And so theologically, the name for our theology opposed to Lutheranism is Reformed. And our polity is Presbyterian, so we're similar to the Presbyterian Church in the United States, but they use their polity name for their denomination. We use the theology. We're Dutch, that's the Dutch flag right there, and heritage, where the Presbyterians are Scottish. And if you ask me, we would be a much bigger denomination than they are if those English people didn't come in and take over New Amsterdam and make it New York. We'd all be speaking Dutch, but since the language was switched to English, they had a leg up and more people went to the Presbyterian Church. If you're Presbyterian, you may have a disagreement about that. And at any time, raise your hand. I might even call on you if you have a question, okay? And so here's just a few facts. I won't cover that whole timeline, but we started as a denomination in 1628 with the Collegiate Church, and they had communion in a loft of a mill. So Marble Collegiate, Middle Collegiate, Washington Collegiate, and I'm forgetting the other one, West End Collegiate Church. That's all part of the Collegiate Church. which we would say we're the oldest continuous denomination in the United States. And it starts from there. The oldest Dutch Reformed church in New Jersey is Old Bergen in 1666, which is now a federated church of the Dutch Reformed Church and also the Presbyterian Church. And so if you can see that on the timeline, what has happened is, and this is where you get different types of Dutch Reformed churches, you had different waves of immigration from the Netherlands, right? And the original ones who founded our church were more wealthy and in the commerce. And then as other Dutch people came over, they were fleeing because of theological differences, and they joined our denomination, but often they then broke off. So like the Christian Reformed Church in North America is a denomination that broke off of us because we weren't serious enough. And we're going to cover a little bit of that. We have, nowadays there are churches that are leaving our denomination. Denominations are splitting. The Methodist Church is going through a big split. So if church life interests you, you'll see that's not an uncommon thing happening right now. So I like a petting zoo. So Arlene and I made a petting zoo for afterwards. We'll tour around, and I'm going to put down the projector and stuff, and you can come up. We'll go up to the gallery if you want. I call the back stairs the stairs of death, because we do have gentler stairs in the back, that if you really want to go up, we can go there. And both Arlene and I'll lead people around. I don't have a lot of time, so I'm going fast. Faster than I might. And so there's different books here, but one of the books I referenced was the yearbook and church director in 1929. And so I took a picture. It's interesting because I'm from the Midwest. I'm from Michigan, if you were wondering. Haven, Michigan. But so there's ads in that directory. And P.L. Zabriskie may be the son of the builder who built the second parsonage we had. But throughout the pages, and that book is down there if you want to take a look at, and you can see there's a maple flower shop. I don't know if anyone remembers that from another time. So it's just an interesting thing. Some quick facts about our church. There has been 20 dominees, which is the Dutch word for pastor, have served as lead pastors, but really 18 primary dominees, because there was a time where 2 pastors from 2 different other churches served when we were without a pastor. The longest tenure, and I'm usually good with Dutch names, I never get his name right, is Reverend Eltinge. At 51 years, he served this church. The second is Reverend Cook, he finished in the 50s for 45 years, and then the Reverend Vander Lindy at 41. My experience of serving churches, you normally don't have 3 pastors with 40 years or plus. So that's an interesting fact for me, at least. Our shortest tenures were Matthias and Blauvelt, both at 1 year. Some history books say 2 years, but it depends.
Blauvelt was 5 months.
Well, let's give them a year. How many people are here because of the Blauvelts? And Arlene is calling them out. So
I can tell you what he did.
we're going to get to that. There has been 7 associate ministers who have served. The last was Rendecker and Top, and we've had 1 parish nurse, Carol O'Neill, from 1990 to 2016. 2 Paramus dominees have been suspended because they misbehaved. Blauvelt. We don't know why, but that charge came from the congregation. And then Kuipers, we know why, and that came from what we call the classis. And he used abusive language towards Dr. Freuling. I'm not sure what that abusive language was. I've been in classis meetings. No one has been suspended over abusive language. Well, I've been a pastor. Maybe we should go back to that. And so both of those, they fought those, but both were suspended. And Vander Lindy was reinstated eventually, not at our church. And so the Reverend Edward Corwin, which he was a pastor of our church, he wrote the first manual of the Reformed Church, or the history of the Reformed Church. He's kind of a big deal for me and nobody else here, but he wrote the history book. the 3 first versions of that. His son did the 4th version, and we still have that to this day that shows who have been ministers, where the churches have come from. The Reverend Staver followed Reverend Babinsky in 2 pastorates, and that's interesting only to me. 2 of the pastors were ordained from the same classes, Raritan, Babinsky in 1942, and Marsden in 1982. 2 of our pastors have served as the president of the General Synod, so that's the whole denomination. Isaac Blauvelt, before he got suspended, and Talmadge in 1874. That's a big deal. I, in the first Western Theological Seminary graduate, there's New Brunswick Seminary, and then there's Western of our denomination. I'm the first one who graduated from Western who has served as the senior pastor here at Old Paramus. And then Everett Zabriskie, Brett Zabriskie, if you know, he's a Ridgewood guy. He and I served the same church, not at the same time, but he's the son of this church, was ordained from this church. And so, one last part, and then we're going to get into the nitty-gritty stuff. Our beginning was, we never had one pastor to ourselves. So, at the beginning, Hackensack, Aqueduct, Ponds, and Paramus shared a pastor. And then Ponds and Paramus shared a pastor for a very long time. And then Upper Saddle River and Paramus were one church with one pastor. So instead of sharing, the difference was there was only one consistory governing both. Consistory is our board governing both churches. So the shared pastor, they would have their own consistory with Upper Saddle River, which often is called Old Stone Church. We were actually one church at one time. And so, you hear about the sanctuary, right? That's what most people want to know. And so, any corrections yet, Arlene? We're good?
You're good.
Okay. You're in our new sanctuary, which was built in 1800. So, this is the new sanctuary. Our original one is supposedly north of here and covering part of that wall, right, Kevin? And we believe, right here, where you're at? Behind me. And so we're doing some research to see if there's some shape there still of that. And so that was an octagonal church, and from 1735 to 1800. They decided to tear that building down, and within 1 year they built this building, besides the alcove, which has been changed a few times. And so most history books say that for that year they worshipped in a large barn just across 17. 17 wasn't what we know it today, of course. And so there is one book that lists us worshiping in Union Hall, which was on Union Street in Ridgewood. I can't confirm that except for that one book. And then in 1800, in 1 year, we built this Dutch brownstone church that we're in right now. So the sanctuaries, this octagonal churches, most of the Dutch churches, when they originally came here and built a building, they were in that shape. You can see, that's a sketch of ours on the left. That's a sketch of 6 Mile Run Reformed Church on the right. And so why an octagonal? That was because of our Calvinistic theology that the sermon was the most important thing. And I'm not just saying that because I'm a minister, but we all know it's the most important thing, right, Arlene? Of course. And so you would sit in a semi-round or a round so you could be close to the sermon. And in fact, this is one of the chairs from that sanctuary. And it's a very Dutch. And so this summer I went to Europe, and at the Vincent van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam, there's a picture, a painting that he drew of the congregation leaving the Reformed Church in Newnan. And so you see it's the octagonal shape. And so that was very much of the tradition. Now, after the Revolutionary War, and George Washington was in that sanctuary, it was in disrepair, and they voted to tear it down. They thought at first they were going to expand it, but that did not win out. And so we have our sanctuary today, this brownstone. And right around the same time, these other churches, other Dutch churches, decided to build new sanctuaries too. And if you look, they are very much the same. So that's Old South Bergenfield, that's Old North Dumont, and then that's Old Stone Upper Saddle River, and that's us. So very similar looking sanctuaries, right? All in that same style, and you know, you can see that was the modern kind of way of having the sanctuary. Now, what we have here today has changed over time. So it was built in 1800. In 1857, 1859, the front was altered, 2 additional doorways on each side, which are locked today. The porticos over those were added, new pews, new planking on the floor, the finest quality, the history book says, finest quality. And the gallery raised because it was saved. Then in 1874, the history book says it was completely rebuilt, and Arlene says,
Nope.
no.
It was just altered.
It was altered. So, you can decide who you want to believe, the history books or Arlene. I usually go with Arlene. The younger members at that time wanted to build a new church. So once again, they wanted to tear down the church, build a new one. The older members swayed them to repair this one or rebuild that. So it was remodeled to what they called the present Victorian style. New pews installed, the steeple restored, walls repaired, new windows put in, the galleries lowered. So when you go in the gallery, it has been raised, lowered, it's been altered a few times. Then in 1891, it was voted to move the choir from the back gallery to the front here, and they needed to increase the size of the alcove. And they wanted to also purchase a new organ. And so Mrs. M.E. Blauvelt donates money up to $2,000, but it has to be at least $1,500 for the new organ. And so it's interesting for me and those who like theology, our original building was really based on a Calvinist principle of the sermon, right? And then the choir being in the back was also Calvin's principle that singing was for the congregation and that it shouldn't be about the choir. And the choir should sit behind them and help them sing. So by 1892, we have changed our layout to kind of go against our theology. And that's where we're today. So interesting, right? Right. Then in 1969, they expanded. So in 1892, that was actually a brick building that didn't really match.
Half a hexagon.
Half a hexagon. And so then in 1869, new organ, they expanded it and went to more of a brownstone to match. Not to be exact, but match our curve. And then most recently, we restored the outside stones that were crumbling. And James Jones, a master builder, he came in and he repaired those stones. And he was impressed with the building. He knows more than I. Kevin would love him. He would come to me and he said, Pastor, look at this stone. See how that's carved this way and that way? That means this and that. I didn't know. But it's good stuff. So.
He was also able to point out that, because the theory was that the original octagon church was also stone. And he was able to confirm that some of the stones used in the building of this church were from that octagon church. Because he can tell specifically, he could go right down to what mason carved a stone by their axe marks on a stone. He knew exactly where they were. And he was a little stumped because he didn't know the whole history of the church. When he did the front of the church, he said, I don't understand. The stones are different. They're not the right stones. They're from a different period. They're from a different area. I don't understand why. And I pointed out to him, we remodeled in 1874. And he said, that explains it. So, but he was able to confirm that we did reuse stones, and that's why the building was able to be rebuilt so quickly, because all the stones were already quarried. The actual church was torn down in the beginning of April of 1800, and the first meeting in the church was September 1st of 1800 for the 100th anniversary of the classis of Paramus was held here.
Interesting stuff. Now, if you take it a step further, we think of this as a stone church. Kevin would tell us that it's really a timber frame church with the stones on the outside, right, Kevin?
Yes.
And so that's kind of the structure of the church. The sanctuary has changed and evolved over time, and I have 3 pictures, hopefully you'll be able to see them, that kind of show that. And, you know, depending on the time period, it just has a different look to it. So this is one of the older ones. You'll see that nothing's painted white, even though this is black and white. Nothing is painted white. It's all the wood color. And you can see that the pipe organs were right here, so there's no alcove in that picture. This is the Reverend Babinski preaching at the pulpit that you see right here. The alcove is expanded a bit, and you will see that the choir is actually, it sat around the organ instead of facing the organ. But it was a smaller alcove. And you see this pulpit with the painted white furnishings. And then here's a Christmas picture more recently, and you'll see that we have from late 60s, we have different pulpit furniture and a different pulpit. That pulpit's in the back. And you'll see these are 2 of the main pulpit chairs, and the original one and then the one from the 60s, you can see quite a bit of a different style. That really takes it from more Gothic looking to a colonial style. Any questions on the sanctuary before we move on to George Washington that a lot of people want to know about?
The age of those chairs?
You know what? I do not. I do know that these have just been reupholstered a few weeks ago. And we pulled them out. I like the old, a few years ago, we talked about kind of arranging the pulpit and the choir loft differently, and so we have pulled these out. And these were not comfortable to sit in, and now they are. There was a plaque on this pulpit honoring Reverend Cook, because that's when they retired it, and he started the Paramus Historical Society. That is now the Ridgewood Historical Society.
And those are functioning pipes?
Those are not.
Oh, yeah.
They used to be functioning. The functioning pipes are behind it. So those are used for decorations. But they at one time were functioning. Our organist, Stuart Holmes, is on vacation. He would talk to you all about what he calls the king of instruments, the organ. And you couldn't use those pipes and pitch them right with the new pipes behind it. That's why they're decorated. Other questions about sanctuary?
I don't know if you'll cover this, but numbers on the pews, I'm guessing the up pews had more money and the back ones.
Yeah, well, I'll answer that question too, because so the side pews were reserved for the pastor's family and for consistory. Consistory is our board made up of elders and deacons. They sat there because if the minister said something wrong, they were to remove the minister from the pulpit. That's why they were there. They were supposed to do that. They no longer sit there. I have never been removed. Maybe I should have. I won't say, but I haven't been.
But I always sit right in the front.
And so we'll get to a little bit more. In the early days, if you moved into a new area, you would be approaching, you would have to pay for the church and a minister and also the teacher in school. That's just part of it. That's part of coming to that area. And then eventually what they did is they sold the pews. And you would buy a pew and that would be yours. You'd have to update periodically money for that pew. But you own that pew, except for the pews to the side, which were reserved for consistory, which would change, and also the pastor's family. There's benches in the gallery, right? Some people call those slave benches. That's not true. They were free benches where slaves sat. So they were reserved for people who didn't own a pew. And that's slaves and other people could sit on those benches. Eventually, and we're going to talk a little bit about this, pew ownership wasn't working, and they went to pew rental for a year. And that's where the numbers come in. You own that pew. There used to be doors, yes, Arlene?
Yes.
On the pews?
No, on ours, never.
Never, okay.
No, we never had.
So, that's how you funded the church, through the pews, and that's where the numbers come
If
from.
you
Arlene believes she still owns a pew over here.
Number 16,
I think, Chuck,
so
are you sitting
I
on
think
it?
Chuck
Oh.
is in my pew.
Hope you paid for that.
But if you notice at the pew you're sitting in, if you look down at the floor, you'll see that there's a cutout on the floor that looks like it would have been a kneeler. They were not kneelers like you would have in a Catholic church. They were not for kneelers. There was actually a piece of wood there that you would keep your feet up on top of because it was a cold, damp floor before it was nicely carpeted. So it would be very cold here in the winter time, so you would keep your feet up on that so you weren't on the cold floor.
So our sanctuary has always evolved, at least to some. And if we've got some choir members, Stuart Holmes, our music director, he wants the carpet removed for his acoustics, you know. So he hasn't won out yet, but we'll see.
I would agree with that.
So, onto the nation and church. The question a lot of people have is George Washington. Yes, he was here on this campus. Now, one of the things I find interesting about history is when we look at history, we're coming from our point of view now and what makes sense to us now. And really, it was a different time. So when we're talking about our campus, it was larger than what you see now here. It's the cemetery, but Ballou Cemetery also included space across 17, next to the old parsonage or manse that was over there. And so it was a large piece of property. So George Washington and his troops could have stayed in a very large area that was still our church. And George Washington wouldn't have stayed in this church. He would have stayed in the Octagon, smaller church, which was north and back here. So it's a different picture. And so his first visit was July 11th through 14th, 1778, following the Battle of Monmouth. The Library of Congress lists about 27 letters signed by Washington with the heading of Paramus. During his July visit, part of the court-martial trial of General Charles Lee for disobedience of orders at the Battle of Monmouth was held at the church. But they actually went to different places where the battles were with the whole court-martial. It didn't happen all here. Two Revolutionary War documents placed George Washington at Paramus Church, which they spell it there with a Y because in one of the letter you're going to see, it's hard to read, that's how it's spelled, from 1778 to 1780. A letter he pinned to Major General Horter Gates on July 11, 1778, and then General Orders Paramus, which Washington issued to the Army July 29, 1780, directed the rear guard of the Continental Army to parade by the church and to be commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Walter Stewart. So these are historical documents that place Washington here. In 1780, British raid in force on military posts at Paramus Church, the old sanctuary, in March 22nd. At the time, the post was manned by soldiers of the Pennsylvania Continental Line. The British scattered the troops, took prisoners, and then returned to New York City. The court-martial trial of Charles Lee, this trial brought several historic figures, among them General William Smallwood, Enoch Poor, and William Woodford, and then also, because of the musical, a lot of people talk about this now, Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Hamilton was a witness at that court-martial here at our church. Speaking of him, Aaron Burr, there are records that we no longer have, but there was a marriage license with Dominique Vanderlinde on there as the one who did the wedding for him and Widow Provers in 1782. So that's another historical figure. We're going to talk about Union Hall. There's not written documentation, but there is anecdotal talk that Abraham Lincoln spoke at Union Hall when it was on Union Street in the balcony right before his presidency. So those are some historical figures who have been connected to our church. This is the letter, which you can't read. I can't even read in copy that Washington pinned from our church. Another interesting part that shows our church how old it is and how much it's connected to our nation, 4 sitting U.S. presidents have been assassinated since we've been a church. And in 1865, Reverend DeMunn delivered a sermon, Lamentation of the Death of President Lincoln, upon his assassination. He also served as the spiritual comforter of President James Buchanan during the latter's fatal illness in 1868. And so, after that tradition, in 1881, when James Garfield was assassinated, Reverend Vanderventer also preached a sermon in the same way. And then in 1901, William McKinley was assassinated, and Reverend Dr. Vroom also preached a sermon on the death of the president. And then, most recently, John F. Kennedy was assassinated, and following in that tradition, Reverend Babinski preached the 4th sermon on Thanksgiving and tragedy marking the assassination of Kennedy. So you see that ministers were a part of the history of our nation and also dealing with what happened within the nation. There's some interesting things we're going to see about how political they may or may not have been. Any questions on that? Our history books, we have several up here that you can take a look at. You can see some of the letters. We don't have those letters in our possession. Some of them are in the U.S. Congress Library. The Historical Society has one, correct, Arlene?
It's a letter written by Washington.
Yep. So.
Do you know how far, you said the church also expanded over, including the cemetery, and then to the other side? By the other side, what did you mean and how far did that go?
So, kind of where the water treatment is, right? You go that direction. We do have deeds. I just came across the legal contracts of selling that property to a developer. And so it has all the parameters of where that is, you know. But we also not only there was a school over there, right, Arlene and Kevin?
Down below.
There was a sexton's house.
The Sexton House still exists. If you look outside of our door here, you can see the yellow house that's over the sound barrier wall. That was our sexton's house, and it was a couple 100 yards from the parsonage.
All
So
the
you
stuff
can
was
get an
south
area-
of the
idea
Settler
where the
property. That's
area
what you're
was.
asking about. The park they're talking about. They were members of a church, but it was our property was south of that. Yes? Arlene?
I'm sorry.
Our property was south of.
We were directly across the street and a little bit south, and then right down below before 17 was there.
But the village parkland they're talking about doing stuff with, that was north
That
of
was
our
not
property.
part of us. The
Yep.
415, that was not part of
It
us.
was part of the church property. Originally it was purchased by John Zabriskie from the church. So, going back, the church property
Was large.
was very large.
And we didn't get a deed to our property until 15 years after building their first sanctuary.
Original deeds and so forth is all.
Yeah.
Some of the.
So you're saying that you think some of our property was where, yes.
The purchase,
He does. Joe.
Where the Shedler house.
Yeah, the Shetler house. You think that was part of our
it's
property?
not fake. He bought
He
it from
knows,
the
okay.
district.
In one of our notes in our history, it said that George Washington's troops were encamped on that property.
Yes.
And the British were also over there.
So, anyway, some of the early 20th century maps before they built Route 17 would be good to look at to see what the property was at that time, and those are in the area.
Okay. As I was looking at the history book, and even like the history of the village of Ridgewood, they have different dates on things than we have, right? I mean, this is part of it. It's interesting to look and try to get, and a lot of the original documents that we had as a church have been lost, right? After the tearing down of our original sanctuary and moving to this sanctuary.
Yeah, there's a question about
On the historic marker outside in that direction,
Mm-hmm.
the name of the French Huguenot who sold this property to old Paramus is listed. How did the Huguenots fit in with the establishment of the Dutch Reformed Church?
Well, the Huguenots are French Calvinists, right?
Right.
And so, because they really didn't have a large presence within the United States, even before it was the United States, they were often connected with the Dutch Reformed Church. And so, the New Paltz Reformed Church started out as a Huguenot church, but is part of our denomination now. And so, if you look at like the structure of denominations, we also have German Reformed within our Dutch Reformed too. You just, wherever, if you're feeling alone and you don't have anyone to support, you connect to someone who's similar to you. We almost, as a denomination, joined, because the Presbyterian Church USA that we know today was 2 to 3 different Presbyterian churches coming together. We almost joined in and became that denomination, but at the last minute we pulled out. And then in the 1950s, when the United Church of Christ was forming with German evangelicals, German Reformed, and Congregationalists from New England, we were in talks to join that denomination, and we pulled out at the last minute. So the denominations we know today aren't, this, there was different groups that formed together. And so the Huguenots were connected because of that, because of the same theology, also the same belief in the Revolutionary War, and so that's where the connection, I believe, comes from. You could probably do more research, but that's my knowledge of it. Yeah.
Question. You had just said that the Shedler property, not to go back to that, but there were records that showed that the American and British troops were
In
there.
one of the history books that I was looking up today, it specifically mentioned that property as having British encampment.
I'm only raising it because my understanding is the town is denying that there is any significance to that property.
I think if you do a Google search like I did, you'll be able to find information.
Yeah, no, I'm just surprised you actually have a record. That sounds pretty.
Well, she's saying history book.
History book, so it's not actually, it's someone's interpretation.
As all historians, right, you usually like to have original. We don't have as many original records as we would like, just because they've been lost.
And my theory on why we don't have any records from the time that the church was occupied during the Revolution was because all the records would have been removed from the building for safekeeping and brought to a member's home, and they probably never found their way back. So Zabriskis, Blauvels, Demarest, Terhunes, start looking in your basements and attics and find those records, because that's probably where they are. Throw in some Bogerts in there also.
We're going to move on. We'll keep taking questions. I'll run out of time. I can feel it already. So that's our sanctuary. We have other buildings. You've seen the brick education building. We've had 2 buildings that we have used for education and fellowship. The first was our chapel, we called it, and we used that from 1875 to 1958. And that was Union Hall from Union Street in Ridgewood that was moved to our campus in 1875, which some believe we can...
No, it was from Ridgewood.
I'm just going by my historian. You got a disagreement? I'll take it. I'll take it. It was demolished in 1958. Okay. All right.
It was called the Republican Hall.
There was more than one Union Hall, I know I've seen, but...
But it wasn't the Union Street School.
No,
No.
it's not the Union Street.
That's
School.
not the one we're talking about. No. So, you're going to see a picture of it in a minute. Then our religious education building, which we have currently, that was built in 1958, and we're still using it to our present day. Here's a picture of the Union Hall with Sunday school. What we call a biblical garden. So west of here, the west end of the graveyard, that's where that building was. And here's another picture of it. Now Arlene is very sad that we tore down the building.
But I wasn't alive when it was
She wasn't
torn
alive,
down,
so she
so-
doesn't take... And so, as a minister, I'm like, another building we don't have to maintain. Sorry, historians, but that's my point of view. Chuck, as the treasurer, he might agree with me too. I don't know. You can see behind in this picture the new education building. And so this is really at the end of its life. It was first moved and then it was raised and a basement was added later on in the 20th century. The next you'll see is just the second annual concert of the Sabbath School, the Reformed Protestant Dutch Church at Union Hall. And this is December 28th, 1865 at 7:30, which this is prior to being moved here, but they had used it for that concert. I just think it's a neat, interesting thing. Our new education building was built, and this is, you can go and look at the building. So these are news clipping articles because it was breaking news for Ridgewood. Old Paramus Church breaks ground on its new education building. This is a sketch of that, and so that's our education building. Now, if you've been in there for a sale or the quilt show or something else, this is a picture. And I believe that's the president of New Brunswick Seminary giving an address. And so you don't really see our stage like that anymore. But you can see that originally that it was meant for as really a hall or an auditorium. And behind this, there is a room, and we still have the plaque that says theater room, so the projector room. So there's a projector room because they had an opening so you could project movies.
It gave way to air conditioning.
It has an air conditioning unit in that. So that's another part of our campus. Now back to history, and we'll see if I got everything right. Well, I knew I was in trouble tonight, but we've had two churches that broke off and became new churches from our church. First Presbyterian Church on Ridgewood, they broke off in 1823 because of disagreement on doctrinal standards. The Reverend Elton Jean was the nominee of Paramus at the time. And then Christ Church broke off in 1864 because of positions on slavery and really overlapping pastors, either Reverend Edward Corrin or Reverend Isaac DeMunt, with the dominies of Paramus.
Where did that term come from, Dominique?
Domini is Dutch for pastor. So it comes from another language. So, I mean, up until, the first part of our heritage, all services would have been done in Dutch. I'm not Dutch, so they would tell me I'm not much. But that's
and I grew up in Midland
heritage.
Park, so if you're from Midland Park and you're not Dutch, you're not much.
So, First Presbyterian Church, they broke off to become the true Dutch church. And they formed the classes of Paramus of the true Dutch church. And so, if you've ever seen Ramapo Reformed Church in Mawa, they had people break off and they became the true Dutch church in Ramsey, which eventually became the Presbyterian church in Ramsey. And so, that's not our history. They just celebrated 200 years. And so they were the true Dutch church. And it was over standards, really, because if you look at the canons of Dort and the Belgian Confessions, they talk about who the true church is within a church. Because in a Christian church, not everyone's going to heaven, people. And so you had to figure out who was, and some people weren't going there. And so there was these standards, who should have communion, and they became really serious. And so they became the true Dutch church, which eventually became the Christian Reformed Church in North America. But in 1899, that church broke off. If you look at their history, they said they got tired of being so serious, basically. And which, if you look at denominations, the Presbyterian Church would be considered a little more liberal than our denomination, Reformed Church in America, and the Christian Reformed Church would be considered a little more conservative. So you just see some movement. What's interesting is our pastor, and there are some documents down here, some people thought, just let them spin their wheels and get upset a little bit and everything will mellow out. No, he fought it. He wrote a whole discourse on why they're wrong. And so it's an interesting splintering, and so that's one. Now, Christ Church, and the next slide I have for you, is from their church parish profile in 2016. So these are their words, not my words. In 1864, during the Civil War, the pastor of Paramus Reformed Church, that's us, not me though, provoked a split in the congregation by flying what one account describes as a pro-abolitionist flag. Shortly after that, 8 couples from Old Paramus wrote to the Episcopal Bishop of New Jersey requesting permission to build a small church on an acre of land in Ridgewood. His answer, I bid you Godspeed. And so and then they asked the question, were our founders pro-slavery? And they say the evidence is conflicting, and until they can resolve it, they will try to be better Christians at that. So we all, if you're old enough as a church and you had slavery as its history, you have to deal with it in some way. And so that is one account of why they split. But as I look at the history, there's a little bit more involved, and some of the accounts are different, and maybe our historians were too afraid to really talk about slavery, so you don't see a lot mentioned. And so there was controversies in our church in 1861 to 1870, so much so that they almost closed down the church. They were looking to close the church down because there wasn't enough people. The sanctuary was in disrepair, and slavery was one of those. So a series of events in which pro-slavery and anti-slavery factions clash created serious friction despite Reverend Corwin's attempts to conciliate them. That's from the 1975 history book. That's an interesting thing because he would have been the one they're claiming raised the flag. So there's interesting thing. Just keep a note of that. According to the consistory minutes of April 18, 1863, the political dissensions of the country have not failed to leave their mark upon the church. Hence, coldness and apathy have seized upon us to a considerable degree. And then, in the book and directory of 1929, it says, Reverend E.T. Corwin was a pastor at the time, and he was intensely loyal to the cause of freedom and of the Union. He said that a flag was kept flying from the steeple of the church through the determination of a band of loyal, devoted men. So that's different than a flag from the parsonage, but maybe that's what Christ Church is talking about, is that he raised a flag. So one history book says that he was intensely loyal to the cause of freedom and to the Union. So that's one of the controversies. There's another one that someone already asked a question about, and it's pews, because pews are so important. So between 1861 to 1870, between those two pastors, pew ownership was contentious. So although the pastor, Damon, was not involved in the trouble, the irritated state of the people made it impossible to preserve harmony or hope for spiritual results. In February 1870, Reverend Damon resigned. So over the pew fighting, he resigned. So that's part of, and that's around the same time frame. So maybe one of the reasons some people left to go to Christ Church was because of that. And while it sounds silly now, but it did fund the church, right? These pews fund the church, and really it's about who's taking ownership and who isn't. And so pew ownership switched to pew rentals for a year at a time, starting on February 5th, 1875, when they renovated the sanctuary. And then pew rental transitioned to pledging and passing of the plates, not until Babinski, actually. So not that long ago that we switched from pew rentals to passing of the plates and pledging. And so that's just an interesting part. Both those things were happening at the same time. I think we can say slavery is a much bigger deal, but both those things were happening when Christ Church left and formed a new church. Now, from the manual and record of Paramus 1859, from Corwin, who I mentioned as a big historian, it'll be hard for you to see, but it's down here. This is a list of members throughout the years up into 1859. And there are, bottom right, it says Duke, slave of Andries Zabrinsky. And throughout that, you'll see slave. At the top, Charles, slave of Jacob Demarest, I think. It's hard to, I mean, it's a little smudged because of printing. And so slaves were a part of our church, and they were considered members. Now, a friend of mine, Reverend Mac Brandon, a pastor of AME Zion, I talked to him about, and he's like, if they're not fully human, they can't be full members. So we might claim them as members, but we might want to rethink that. And
wasn't slavery abolished in New Jersey in like 1830 or something like that?
from my understanding, slavery, this is records of prior to 1859. So you're seeing here 1800. So it was still, you could become free, I believe, right, Kevin? You were saying, as a slave, but people still held.
1787 Constitution of New Jersey, the state constitution, got changed. And then it went to standard slavery rules that were across the entire country.
Okay.
Prior to that, they had far more rights than most other places.
Did you raise your hand to add something?
New Jersey passed gradual abolition of slavery starting in 1804, but there actually were still several slaves in New Jersey that were only emancipated by the, I never can remember the right number, 15th Amendment that abolished slavery in the United States.
Okay.
So it was a very long time period, and unfortunately, sometimes in our history books, people who actually were free are called slaves up until the Civil War.
Okay.
So it was a whole mix, and as you said, they weren't always considered fully human or fully citizens, so what their role was is...
And it wasn't as simple as being pro-slave or anti-slave, right? There was different, like, don't let slavery expand to other parts, let's keep it here, from my understanding. So there was, so when they say he was against slavery, to what degree, I don't know, that pastor was or wasn't. It's true that many of the pastors did have slaves in our church. They had slaves in the manse across the street. That was just part of the history of the church. And Kevin was also mentioning that there was in fact shackles up by the benches. They were removed. Kevin, did you hear that? Yes. So. Any other questions on that?
Where did you say the shackles are?
They were up by the benches.
Up here.
Yeah, they're not there anymore. They were well removed. Yep. And we're still, as a church, you know, working on and talking about what our history involves in that. With Matt Brandon at AME Zion, up until COVID, and then we have to revive it a little bit, we were making connections. We did a pulpit swap where he came and he preached, and I preached over there. He really wanted to preach at a church where there was slaves. And so it was a good swap. I think my church likes him better than me. I try not to take it personal. He says his church likes me better than him. I don't know about that. But for a while, up until COVID, we were doing a joint summer worship out in the park together, just to continue this idea of ending racism and making a connection through that. We're almost done. Then we'll ask more questions and then we'll walk around. The last building I'm going to look at here is our parsonage or manses. Manse is just a fancier Presbyterian name. I don't know when we switched. I think they switched before me to make me think this was a really fancy place to come and be the pastor. So we've had three main parsonages. They have bought houses throughout Ridgewood for associate pastors. I didn't do research on to find those, but I believe one was on Pershing, right? Yeah. So the original parsonage was from 1750 to 1871. It was a brownstone house across 17. And it was torn down, and the foundation and the kitchen was left for what many people call the old parsonage from 1871 to 1965. That was built on the original foundation. It was built by Peter G. Zabriskie, the best builder around. That's from Mrs. Cook, the wife of the Domine, who wrote that about that. And it was 3 stories high with a study, a large dining room, a front and back parlor, 6 bedrooms above, and 1 in the attic. That was torn down when they bought our current parsonage, which is right over here. You see a picture of it. This is an old picture. You see an old van in front of it. There is a cornerstone that says 1704, and then it's faded. We don't know the exact date, but that's an old building. This, what I call the rectangle where the 3 windows are, right where the van is, that's the original house. And then, depending on who you ask, I think, Kevin, you're saying there's 3 buildings on the other section put together. 5 total, okay. One of which was one of the old schoolhouses that was on our campus. And it was connected to that. We did not buy it until the 60s, and it's believed that the original structure, the people who lived there had a fish hatchery on the Saddle River. There's still 1 pond left, and there used to be another one over there too, right?
That was backfilled and Ridgewood built the retaining wall across.
Okay. So that is our buildings that we're going to cover. We're almost done. We'll take more questions. So now it's time just to have a little fun. This is just a picture from 1955 where the Paramus Couples Club, which was a big part of our church for a long time, they put on the Oklahoma Roundup for 2 nights. You can see how fantastic they look. Here's a picture of the 250th anniversary plaque right over here. Up front is Reverend Staver, often called Rev, and then behind him is the Reverend William Babinski. During William Babinski's time is when our church went from 100 people in the worship to over 300 people. And he went door to door in Paramus when all those new houses were built, and he invited people to church, and that's when we really grew and swelled in number. We used to have 2 worship services, and that's, when they built the education building, which at that time, all 3 levels were filled with children. And now, to our present time, this is a picture of the graveyard. Last year, we put up a sign with all the names of who we know is in the cemetery. Joe helped us with that, so it's got to be right. And so, if you come and visit, you can look at that, and it gives you what rows to go to, and you can find a name. Probably interesting for a society like we have tonight. So, Paramus Reformed Church is a historic district. It's open to the public. We've got the churchyard, the graveyard, the historic sanctuary, which is locked. For a while, we opened it once a month for people to come and tour. No one came. So if you're interested, we'd be willing to do that again. We just need people to come. The Schoolhouse Museum, we own that building, and it's run by the Historical Society, and it's part of our property. The Manse is not open to the public. Be nice to me, I might invite you in. But, so don't knock on the door. My wife would get upset. The Staver Memorial Gazebo is out there. A lot of people like to sit there. Little Ivy Learning Center uses the lower level of the education building. We have a fishing trail to Saddle River, which was an Eagle Scout project. We have a community garden. The season is done, but we have plots over there. We want to be and we strive to be a community church. The Ridgewood Senior Thanksgiving Dinner is hosted here at Ridgewood. Our Old Paramus Reformed Church is a great dinner, and this was the first year we were back since COVID, so it was nice to be in person. Before that, we just used the parking lot, and the people would pick up the meal. The Ridgewood Interfaith Thanksgiving Worship is held. It's going to be this year, November 21st at 7:30 p.m. It's right here. The best worship service there is every year. I don't preach at it, so
Absolutely.
yes, thank you, Debbie. It's a great service. The Ramapo College Choir's winter concert has been held in this sanctuary since 2012, except for COVID for 2 years. We have support groups. The Ridgewood Rotary Club meets the first and third Tuesday for lunch. And not to be confused with the morning, we're the Ridgewood Rotary Club. That's our name. We are the true Ridgewood Rotary Club. Sorry. And then we're not just a museum. We have active worship. Some people say the pastor is charming. Some people say he's not. You can't please everybody. We have organ choir. We have religious education for all ages. We have funerals and weddings for church people and also for the wider community. I've had, in the last few years, several people that just drove by and like, oh, do you do weddings? And we've had their weddings here. I was saying in my sermon on Sunday, I've had 2 of the weddings I've had in the last 10 years. The grooms were groomsmen. They were both builders. The first thing they asked is, oh, the bride's looking at the sanctuary. Can we go look at the basement? They wanted to see the foundation and things like that. So that's who we are. We love, in like the society, right? You were going to have a parking issue for one of your meetings, and you came over. That's what we want to be that. The League of Women Voters I should have put on there. They meet yearly here. They fill the parking lot, League of Women Voters do. And so that's who we are. We'll take questions and we'll walk around. I'll put down the screen, we'll go up. Is there any other questions? Anything you want to correct? That was Arlene's job. You kind of took it from her, but.
So the Episcopal Church was built on North Pleasant. And then it was moved down the hill, across the river to where it is today.
Interesting.
You hold the organ concerts?
We do on occasion, yeah. You know, it just depends. Yeah. Debbie's part of the Northern AGO, the Guild of American Organists, and you guys had some recitals here.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And usually have students, and then our Stuart Holmes has put on some different ones. If you're interested, well, we also had a classical guitar concert in the fall, I believe, in October. So, yeah, we try to involve and...
Everything we hold here, we post on our Facebook account, so you can always follow us on Facebook.
And we have our electronic sign now. That's not original, if you were wondering. And so, other questions?
What do you think the 300th anniversary celebration will be?
Epic. It'd be, we're just starting to talk about what we're looking at and what we want. When we were asked to do this presentation, it was kind of a fun thing to get us thinking about and gathering all our information. Our historical records haven't always been kept perfectly, so we're trying to gather those, put those together, and I haven't lost anything, nor has Arlene, but other generations have lost some items, so that's what we're looking at. But I know in the past we've had concerts, we've had dedications. We're looking, right after our 300th anniversary will be the 400th anniversary of our denomination in 2028, right? So.
Are you doing anything to celebrate America's 250?
We have not planned that at this point. One of the reasons we do the Thanksgiving service here is because of being the original church. And the Interfaith Council likes to have the service here because of that. And so we've been, for a while, it had been moved from our church. Just because, I mean, it's a lot of work for the pastor, you know, and so, but now we're back and it's been a wonderful time, I think since 2014. But we could probably incorporate something in that too.
Isn't there a story about the eagle?
Well, that's a good story, Arlene.
It's not an eagle, it's a dove. And the story we have behind it, it was carved by a British soldier who, when he was a patient here during the Revolutionary War, he was so appreciative of the care that he received from the doctor here that he carved that and gave it to the doctor, and the doctor gave it to the church.
There's debate if it's an eagle or a dove. For the most part, we say it's a dove, which would fit better within a Christian church, right? That makes sense. Way back, and then I'll come to the middle.
How about the lighting? Was this lighting fish your original and candlelit, or?
No, those have changed over time. If we can go back a little bit.
I can show you a picture that you have. It has a chandelier.
Was it the same chandelier?
Yeah,
Let's
I
look.
have it earlier. Earlier, we had gas lights on the side. We didn't have
This is
electric.
not the oldest, but that's the same one. So the three pictures I have does have the same chandelier, but they do all look electric, you know.
And some of the oil lamps are now in the.
At the museum.
So some of them are up there. Yeah, and we never had a bathroom, you know, that's not original to the, so that's, you know, part of the, why you have to walk around to get to it. Air conditioning, which you're feeling right now, is not original either, so there's a lot of modern things. You see this portable screen. I think the church would die if you ever get an electronic one, but we'll see. You know, things change. We do have a camera. We live stream now because of COVID, and we've changed to that. A question right here?
Yeah, what's the oldest identified burial in the
Arlene thought
I
someone
will
would ask
look
that.
that up and find it out for you.
1660.
What was it?
I think it was around 1660.
1660, you think? Okay.
Yeah, I think so.
And so some of the, because of the building of this sanctuary, some of the graves were moved from this space over to Valu Cemetery. So Valu Cemetery, we own that. It has its separate board that reports to our church board, but it is still an active and open cemetery, but part of our church. Non-sectarian, though. They have been a non-sectarian cemetery for anyone to be buried.
Since 1929.
Since 1929. Here we go.
1929, it became non-sectarian.
Originally, we were just a Dutch Reformed cemetery, right? In 1929, we became non-sectarian and more of a separate institution. At that time, Reverend Cook, he ran everything, the cemetery, the church. I don't have to do that, if you were wondering. I have a question here, a question over there.
This old house question.
Okay.
Why are the steam pipes the way they are by the windows?
Well,
Rather than along the wall?
It was easier to put them into the alcove of the windows because that's the actual walls. The walls are that thick. So it was easier to just put them on there rather than put them against the wall because the pews are against the wall. In our Reformed church, our pews go directly against the wall. Some of the other ones that you may have seen in the pictures, their sanctuaries, they have an aisle to the outside of the pew. We don't have it here, so we go right to the wall, so that's where they fit. And being as though the walls are so deep, we had room to put them there.
Kevin, you're going to add something?
You would have to drill through the timber frame and the walls.
And the stone.
Oh, yeah.
So that's, I have a question way back here by the pillar. Yeah?
Okay, you were talking about Valu, and I was hoping you were going to say a little bit more about it. A lot of us, I was hoping, yeah, I'm not a person to speak. The records for Valu and being a genealogy group, how can we go to find out any of the records or when people died or whatever?
If you call our office, the church office is also Valu's office. We have a person there. They can, Virginia can often help you find graves and people because we keep the records. I'm laughing a little bit because the president of the Valu board is right in front of you, Sid Robertson. And so we would be more than willing to, if you would come in or call, give us the name, they would help you find anybody who may be in there because we do have the records.
If you have a date of death, it makes it extremely, easier for us.
So yeah, we're willing to help, and that, so that if you're looking for something at Valu, we can help you find it. And I don't even pronounce it right because it's a French name. Sid will pronounce it right for you, right, Sid? Right. So he's not going to do it. Pam, you're calling me out too, aren't you, Pam? You're going, yeah, hello. Okay, there we go. I'm from Michigan, and in Michigan, we have all these French words that we have just killed. and made them English. And it's stuck, I guess.
He kills some English words too.
Yes. You have a question?
We're talking about Ballou, and one of the questions I have is that I've heard that there are many slaves buried in Ballou, but I don't believe that they have headstones. Is there a certain section in Ballou where slaves were buried, or?
They are not sectioned off.
They're not.
A lot of times, they may have been buried in the family plot of the family that they were associated with.
There are black people buried there without stones.
There are white people buried.
There are very many people buried without stones.
One section that is, we know a lot of black people are buried there, and they do not have stones because they were poor. Someone who had owned some of the ponds was able to bury her friends and neighbors in there. But there is a big section, people look at it and say, what a wonderful place that would be. And they have to be told, there's nothing available in that area. It looks like a great spot. There are no spots.
But there's no per se section. Like if you go to Pascack Reformed Church Supper in Park Ridge, there is a specific section that they have fenced off.
So the first black person buried in the cemetery here is no longer there. Because once the trustees found out about it, someone had bought a plot and buried this person. They said, we will buy that plot back and we will pay for a plot someplace else. So the first black person to be buried there was, it is now in the Pascack. I don't remember, but I know who.
It was part of the Terhune family.
Other questions? We can go on a tour in a moment. So these pipes here are decorative. So the pipes you see are decorative pipes from the original few organs, but they are not used now. So behind them are the pipes, and then in the back, you'll see pipes. Those pipes are used, and there is also pipes behind them. So we have pipes in the balcony and pipes behind these chests. Debbie could probably speak more to that. She's played this instrument, and Debbie is the organist at Westside Presbyterian.
And some of those pipes originally did speak.
Yes.
The decorative ones in an earlier vintage of the organ, but they're not part of its scheme.
No.
But there's way more than that than what you see behind them.
Yeah. With the newer pipes, you just could not sync them up correctly, probably, to get the right sound.
Yeah, and I know it had something to do with how the air pressure was funneled to them, and it was a problem.
And this is not a manual organ, so it's an electric console that communicates to and opens the pipe. So it's not an electric organ like you think of, and you get this electric pipe sound, but the console itself is using electronics to make the wind and to open the pipes in the different places. There are some electronic voices, I believe.
Yes, there are.
How old is it?
This was the late 90s, I believe. And Stuart Holmes, so we call this the Nevin organ, that's the pipe builder who, the organ builder who made this out of some of the original pieces and also added new. And he's got several organs in this area, I believe.
Yes.
And so, so Stuart is still here, and this is his baby. He loves this. And it actually moves. We could actually move it down to the floor. You'd have to carry it, but you have some ability to move that console around and have flexibility in the style of worship. So an interesting thing.
The older church home we mentioned, there's a modern one, is up here on the west side. Where exactly do you know the original parsonage was?
Our parsonage?
Yeah.
So our parsonage was across 17 over here. And Arlene knows a little bit better of the location, but the original manse or parsonage is torn down, but it's closer to the water treatment, correct?
Well, that's a little.
That's a little too
that's
far?
A little south.
Okay.
So if you look for the yellow house, and if you go 150 yards north, it would be right about where that is.
And that property, along with some of the loo, which was over there, right, was sold to a developer.
That section of the loo was never used. It was a future expansion. No graves were ever there, so nothing was ever moved from there. That was just future expansion property.
Do you know what year that was sold?
Yes, and I had a slide on it.
Well,
Let me go
not
back
the
there.
Ballou Cemetery, I don't know that.
Well,
but the house itself was sold in '65.
Yeah. And as we've been looking and preparing for this, I came across more documents than I could spend time with, but we do have the legal documents that was selling that property over there. So.
Those of us genealogists, I and many others have researched our Reformed Church ancestry, and Russell Casero in New Brunswick has been a wealth of information for us. Are your records on site here, your old records, or are they down in York?
We have a combination here, there, and then, because the Ridgewood Historical Society was a part of our church. Our pastor, Reverend Cook, started the original society, which was called the Paramus Historical Society. And in the 2000s, early 2000s, they separated from us. So they have some of those same records. Maybe 2 years ago, we got a few boxes back of things they didn't need. And so
Have they been digitized?
every church is different. And I have a book down here that a genealogical society reproduced, and I was able to buy it off of Amazon. Amazon, you can buy everything. Baptisms, members, deaths, Reformed Church, 1740 to 1850. Now, I don't want to be telling on the ancestors of old Paramus, but in it talks about how our records were done strangely. And how baptisms were alphabetical instead of by date. So, it's interesting, as my last church was in Walden, New York, north of here, the records were perfect. We have an old, which is still our current membership book, and it was handwritten, and they started with stuff, and so by the time you get membership, you're running into baptism. So they just went to another section. So there's notes to say you go to this page, you go back to that page, you go to this page. It just it's just the way it is. Well, we're talking about that. We categorize all those documents, and now we have file cards that you can find the right page. But we do have all our modern stuff. All the new members are on computer, and we're continuing.
We don't care about those.
Yeah, I know you do.
Well, I believe it was Reverend Corwin who sent most of our records down to New Brunswick.
So you mentioned Russell, right? So he wrote the most latest historical directory. But that's based on Corwin's, our minister, when he was here, wrote the first one. This is the 3rd edition. His son wrote the 4th edition, and then Peter Vandenberg, a minister who was at Walden where I was, he wrote the 5th one, and then the most recent one right here. And so there's some things, in different books that I have and we have here, there's a history of the classes of Paramus. There is our history book I've lost.
I've got one here.
But there's different books that do have different membership in there, including this book. Oh, here's one. This is, Corwin wrote the 1859 Paramus. That has the records of everyone who were members, including slaves, which you saw a slide of, up until 1859. So we have some of those resources. We're willing to share them with you. You normally can't take them out. I did lend out a few books. It took me a while to get back, so we try to keep them here.
The library has many
Of those same books.
Heritage
Okay,
Center, yeah.
so we're willing to help anyone find if we can, you know. So I think I can talk a long time. I'm a minister. It takes me 15 minutes to say my name, but I think if you want to walk around, we can do that now. I don't know if you guys want to say in closing. You can come up. Arlene pulled out a piece of the original steeple. Right there. We've got some pictures. We've got some other documents. There's some books up here, some other pictures you can take a look at. And, you know, it's interesting as I was looking at the different historical books, and we don't have a lot of the originals, they do contradict each other in a few sections, like about Union Hall or a barn across the way. Dates are a little bit different. Interesting. I find that interesting, and trying to figure it out is also a puzzle. So.
The newspapers sometimes help.
Yes, we have some newspaper clippings.
The newspaper was published.
Yeah.
Thank you, it was really interesting.
You're welcome. I'm going to put the screen down, and then you can walk. If you want to come up, I'll walk some people around too. Arlene can do that. If you have individual questions, we can take those too.
I know what time services are on Sunday.
You can get that online.
You're all welcome.
I heard your voice. I sometimes go to this church with my dear friends, I actually go to your church where you did. That's what I remember. That's a different church too. But I come here periodically, my instrument, go to this church, and they told me about this talk, and I'm in okay, I figured you were here. I figured you. Listen, I love Robert. Okay, then what I they do. Because I know some other people members of this church. But oh, I'm sure they do. They told me that I love history. And when I grew up in talk around here. I know, and then I'm here, you ask a question, because I didn't see you, and I thought, oh, and I said, good thought. I said, I know that voice. Oh, yeah? Yeah. We always start pretty soon. But you can go, that's the only time. Okay, so you start right here. It's not, because I know you're thinking, I think it's the
Yeah, I was wearing blue shorts. Blue shorts.
Yeah, she was trying to ask me about football pants on. But I was even thinking, I
And it's the only kind of church I'll be in.
that's why we have
Oh, yeah.
Okay, because I thought of those, and I believe it's other cities actually into the 1900s.
That's why.
Trinity
was.
So one of them, my they had
Jim sings in the choir. I'm speaking only from listening.
No, she spelled it out. My mother didn't spell it out. She gave me information. She spelled it L-U-C-I-N-G. She had no fucking idea. So she just gave me that. And I'm
Nice
like,
compact door.
no, L-U-C-I-N-G. Lucy. So I see Lucy
Rudolph
East or whatever. And I'm like, right. So I'm like, there we go. That's she actually, many of them, none of us could believe the too quickly. My daughter is not a master's. So the first week of March. So would not do it. He's a little disturbed. I could be